During my child's birthday party, I discovered a secret that shattered our family. The morning started with sunlight spilling gently through the kitchen window, the kind of light that made everything look golden and soft. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirping of birds outside, and the low creak of the floorboards as I moved from room to room, preparing for what I wanted to be the perfect birthday morning. My child's laughter echoed from the bedroom, a light, airy sound that filled me with warmth and a deep, instinctual love I couldn't quite put into words. The balloons we had bought days ago bobbed slightly in a morning breeze coming through the half-open window. Their bright colors, reds, yellows, and blues, danced softly against the living room walls. I ran my fingers over a string, feeling its slight roughness, and imagined how delighted my child would be when they saw the full decorations later. It was supposed to be a day of joy, of celebration, of laughter that would linger in our memories. I moved into the kitchen, smelling the faint sweetness of pancakes I had started preparing. The butter melted on the hot griddle, sizzling softly, filling the air with comfort. I hummed quietly, trying to keep my nerves calm, reminding myself that this was just another morning, another day to create happiness. Yet, despite the ordinary beauty of it all, there was an almost imperceptible tension in my chest, like a small weight that didn't belong. I glanced at the dining table, where I had meticulously arranged plates, napkins, and silverware, imagining my child's eyes lighting up when they saw it all. The arrangement was symmetrical, almost obsessively neat, yet something about the way the light fell on the table seemed off. Shadows lingered where they shouldn't, small dents on the wood caught my eye, and I felt a strange flicker of unease that I couldn't quite name. From the corner of the living room, I noticed a relative who had arrived early, offering a smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. Their hand lingered a little too long on the back of a chair, and when they laughed softly at a joke someone made, it came out a little too sharp, too practiced. I forced a smile back, not wanting to ruin the morning, but my gut tightened. Something felt off. The smell of fresh flowers from the small bouquet on the windowsill mixed with the warm scent of pancakes. I inhaled deeply, trying to anchor myself to the pleasantness, but my eyes kept drifting towards small details I couldn't ignore. A chair slightly out of place, a drawer that had been left ajar, a phone buzzing silently on the counter. Nothing seemed overtly wrong, yet the accumulation of minor irregularities gnawed at me. I walked past my child's bedroom door, hearing the shuffling of feet and the soft rustle of sheets. Their giggles sounded lighter than usual, almost tentative, and I paused for a moment, placing my hand on the doorframe. The wood felt smooth under my palm, grounding me, yet a subtle pang of worry ran through me. I wanted to shake it off, tell myself that everything was fine, but my intuition had a way of whispering truths before words could even form. The decorations in the living room looked perfect, almost unreal. Streamers hung precisely, edges aligned with an exacting care that, in hindsight, seemed too deliberate. The small banner that read "Happy Birthday" fluttered slightly, catching the breeze, and I reached out to straighten it, feeling the thin paper crinkle under my fingers. I imagined the moment my child would run into the room, eyes wide with wonder, and tried to push the creeping sense that not everything was as it should be to the back of my mind. I brewed coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, blending oddly with the faint smell of vanilla from the birthday cake we had set aside. I sipped cautiously, the warm liquid offering a temporary comfort, but I couldn't stop noticing the small, tense glances exchanged between a few early arrivals. Their expressions flickered just slightly when they thought no one was looking, subtle shifts in posture, quick movements of hands that seemed rehearsed. My child peeked into the kitchen, hair slightly mussed from sleep, eyes bright and expectant. They reached out for a hug, and I enveloped them fully, holding them a little tighter than usual. The softness of their hair, the warmth of their small body against mine, grounded me in a way that nothing else could. I whispered that it was going to be a wonderful day, and they smiled, their joy pure and unguarded, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe it. Even as the morning light grew stronger and the house filled with the sounds of preparation, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was hidden just beyond sight. Small details, too small to be certain of, pulled at the edges of my mind. A drawer left slightly open in a room I hadn't entered yet. A soft murmur from the hallway that stopped abruptly when I entered. The brush of movement in my peripheral vision that vanished before I could pinpoint it. I stepped back into the living room, running my fingers over the edge of the couch, feeling the familiar texture of the fabric. I tried to focus on the bright colors, the balloons, the careful arrangement of snacks and presents. The house smelled of cake, coffee, and a hint of spring flowers, comforting yet somehow uneasy. My heart beat a little faster, though I couldn't yet name the source of the fluttering anxiety. In these early moments, the world felt normal and yet not quite right. Every smile seemed slightly strained, every gesture practiced, and every word too carefully chosen. I reminded myself to breathe, to keep everything light and cheerful, to preserve the perfect morning for my child. And as I set the last plate on the table, hearing the faint sound of distant laughter from the back porch, I felt a subtle ache of isolation, like standing in the center of a bustling room, yet somehow completely alone. By the time I finally stood back to take it all in, the living room bathed in sunlight, balloons swaying gently, I realized the quiet unease had settled deeper in my chest. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was there, an almost imperceptible hum beneath the surface of the perfect birthday morning I had envisioned. And as I breathed in the mingled scents of coffee, cake, and flowers, I allowed myself a quiet hope, fragile but insistent, that this day could still be everything I wanted it to be for my child. Everyone started arriving just after mid-morning, the soft hum of car doors and greetings drifting in from the driveway. The house, filled with sunlight and the scent of fresh cake, should have felt joyous, but I immediately noticed the subtle tension in the air. One relative, who always seemed to brighten a room with effortless charm, greeted me with a wide smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. It was a little too bright, too practiced, and my chest tightened without reason, a whisper of instinct I couldn't ignore. As I moved through the living room, greeting guests and helping my child adjust a crooked balloon, I caught sight of that same relative laughing at a joke I didn't hear. Their shoulders were rigid, and their eyes flickered toward the hallway before returning to the crowd. I tried to dismiss it, reminding myself that sometimes people just carry stress or distractions. Still, something about the way their laughter carried a sharp edge felt wrong. The kids were running around, shrieking and squealing with delight, but even in the chaos, I couldn't shake the sense that someone's happiness was surface deep. My child's giggles rang out, bright and pure, but I noticed how they paused mid-laugh to glance at the relative, a small, unspoken exchange I couldn't interpret. My stomach tightened. I had been so focused on planning the perfect morning that I hadn't allowed myself to truly watch the people around me, and now my attention felt like a magnifying glass. I carried a plate of pancakes into the dining area, setting it down carefully, the scent of syrup mingling with the vanilla from the cake. I kept my eyes subtly on the room, watching the relative move from guest to guest with what appeared to be casual charm, but every step, every gesture, seemed slightly too careful. A flicker of tension in their jaw, a hand brushing against the table with a little too much force. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the rising sense of suspicion that gnawed at my chest. My child came running over to me, hugging tightly and asking if the birthday decorations were perfect. I smiled, ruffling their hair, but my mind kept circling back to the unusual energy radiating from the relative. There was something in their posture, a tightness behind the charm, that made me uneasy. It wasn't about the party, and it wasn't about me. It was something else, something they were hiding, and my instinct screamed that I needed to pay attention. I made small talk with another family member, nodding and smiling as I tried to mask the unease growing in my chest. My voice sounded normal, calm even, but inside I was acutely aware of the way my eyes kept darting toward the relative. Their smile was wide, their words cheerful, but I noticed the subtle micro-expressions, the brief narrowing of eyes, the slight purse of lips when they thought no one was watching. It was nothing overt, yet everything about it felt wrong. A glass of juice slipped from my hand as I reached for a plate, and I realized my hand were trembling ever so slightly. Not from anger or fear, but from the rising knot of worry I couldn't name. I told myself it was stress, excitement, the usual nervous energy of hosting a birthday, yet my heart refused to settle. I sensed a hidden layer beneath the festivities, a secret that could unsettle the fragile balance of our family morning. I stepped back into the living room and caught a moment of reflection in the window glass. My own eyes looked tired, my expression a little too careful. I wanted to push my anxiety aside, but the more I observed the room, the more I realized that my gut was right. Something about this relative's behavior didn't fit. There was a tension, a tightness, a small crack in their carefully curated facade, and I couldn't unsee it. The other guests were chatting, laughing, eating pastries, and passing small gifts, but my attention remained anchored to the relative's every movement. I noticed the way they tilted their head when speaking, as if listening for something beyond the conversation. The way their hands fiddled with a napkin, the subtle tapping of a foot that no one else noticed. Each detail was tiny, fleeting, but together they painted a picture that didn't belong in a joyful, carefree birthday morning. I knelt to help my child adjust their party hat, feeling the soft fabric between my fingers, and whispered that everything was going to be perfect. They looked up at me with trusting eyes, oblivious to the tension I felt, and I forced a smile, trying to mirror the joy I wanted to see reflected back. My protective instincts flared. More than ever, I wanted to shield them from anything that could taint this day. The relative passed by again, brushing past me in a way that seemed almost deliberate. Their smile was quick, their words polite, but there was a hidden rigidity in their steps. I felt my chest tighten further, an uncomfortable twist that I couldn't ignore. Something about their presence felt invasive, as though they carried a secret meant only for themselves. My mind circled possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. I tried to focus on the simple pleasures, the laughter of children, the scent of warm cake, the sunlight glinting off the balloons. But beneath it all, I couldn't shake the sensation that the room held a tension I wasn't invited to fully understand. That smile, that too bright expression, haunted the corners of my awareness, and I realized I was already on alert, listening for clues, watching for slips, waiting for the first undeniable sign of truth. Even as the morning moved forward, laughter and chatter filling the spaces, my heart held a quiet suspicion. I didn't yet know what was hidden or why, but I could feel it in the energy of the room. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't ignore it. And in that moment, holding my child close and smiling at the world I had created for them, I felt a protective vigilance settle in, subtle but unyielding, a promise to myself that I would uncover the truth no matter what it took. Before this morning, our family had what I always thought of as a steady rhythm. Days blurred together with the small routines of life. Morning breakfasts, school drop-offs, quiet dinners. The little rituals that felt ordinary were also comforting. I remembered the way my child would insist on sitting in the same chair every night, how we would always watch cartoons together before bedtime. These habits, small as they were, became the backbone of our sense of safety. Our weekends were predictable, too. Saturday mornings were pancakes and cartoons. Sunday afternoons were spent at the park or doing chores together. I took pride in the way my child's laughter would echo through the house, and I had learned to cherish those moments of pure, unguarded joy. But now, looking back, I could see the faint cracks that had always existed beneath the surface. Small things I had dismissed as quirks or coincidence were perhaps hints of something more. Family dinners, for example, had always been lively. Stories would fly around the table, jokes traded like currency, but I began to remember the fleeting moments of tension I had once brushed aside. A glance that lingered too long between two relatives. A carefully phrased question, met with an unusually quick laugh. At the time, I had written these moments off, too focused on keeping the peace, too eager to preserve the harmony of our home. My partner, always charming and seemingly kind, had a way of making everyone feel at ease. Their laugh was infectious, their smile disarming. But there had been times, subtle, almost imperceptible, when I sensed a quiet evasiveness. A small lie about a phone call, or an explanation that didn't fully make sense. Nothing that ever raised alarms, nothing concrete enough to question the foundation of our family. Just flickers like shadows passing across the wall in the corner of my vision. I remembered birthdays past, the very moments we now tried to recreate. Candles blown out, gifts exchanged, smiles that seemed unbreakable. Yet there had been times when a present arrived late, or a card had a tone that fell off, and I had chalked it up to oversight or a busy schedule. Now, with the clarity of hindsight, I realized those tiny missteps had been threads, weaving a pattern I had been too naive to see. Even ordinary routines, the dropping off of a child at school, the quick check-ins with relatives, the casual conversations over coffee, carried subtle signs. A tone too sharp, a hesitation before answering, a sudden change in subject. Individually, they were inconsequential, invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But together, they formed a mosaic of behaviors that hinted at duplicity, at hidden agendas quietly shaping our lives behind the scenes. The charming relative who now seemed so tense at the birthday party had always been part of our lives. I recalled evenings where their laughter had filled the room, moments where I had trusted them implicitly. But there were also instances when their words felt calculated, when I sensed a glimmer of something unspoken. At the time, I had dismissed it as stress or fatigue, never imagining that these small deceptions would someday culminate in something far more serious. I thought about the small betrayals I had encountered over the years. A forgotten promise, a hidden conversation overheard by chance, a subtle manipulation disguised as helpful advice. None of them had been devastating on their own, and I had always believed in forgiveness, in understanding, in the power of love to cover imperfections. Yet now, each memory seemed like a breadcrumb leading to a truth I had refused to acknowledge. Our home, once a sanctuary, had quietly witnessed all of this. The walls had absorbed laughter and whispered secrets alike. I remembered the soft light of the living room during winter evenings, the smell of cookies baking, and the gentle murmur of conversations that never seemed to reach me fully. Those moments of domestic bliss had always been comforting, but I now realized they were often tinged with subtle tension, unnoticed by me in my desire to preserve the family I loved. I could see now how patterns had formed over time. Certain relatives would arrive at precise moments. Conversations would veer in predictable ways, and my partner's attention would sometimes flicker toward a topic they didn't want me to pursue. It was all small, almost invisible, but persistent. The undercurrent of secrets had always been there, quietly influencing our lives, shaping interactions, and leaving tiny fractures I had been too trusting to perceive. Even my child, innocent and unassuming, had occasionally mirrored these tensions in ways I hadn't noticed. A pause before speaking, a glance at someone that lingered too long, a sudden hesitancy when mentioning certain people or events. At the time, I assumed they were mimicking adult behaviors or reacting to fleeting moods. Now, I began to see those moments differently, as subtle signals that even the youngest among us could sense when things weren't quite right. And yet, despite all these hints, life had felt safe. Love had always been our anchor. I had believed in the strength of our bonds, in the stability of routines, in the goodness of those closest to us. It was only now, reflecting in the quiet morning before my child's birthday, that I realized how easily appearances could mask reality. The warmth of family could coexist with deception, and the laughter that once reassured me could hide shadows I was only beginning to recognize. In the weeks leading up to my child's birthday, things had started to feel different. Not drastically, not in ways that would alarm anyone else, but enough for me to notice if I paid attention. It began with little things, texts sent late at night, phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, explanations that didn't quite make sense. At first, I brushed it off as normal life stress, but a small voice in my chest refused to be ignored. One evening, I noticed my partner's phone light up across the room. They glanced at it quickly, and when I asked who it was, they mumbled a vague answer before turning back to what they were doing. There was nothing incriminating, nothing obvious, yet their reaction felt wrong. Their hands trembled slightly as they set the phone down, and I noticed the faint scent of perfume I didn't recognize lingering in the air. My stomach tightened, a low hum of unease that I tried to silence with a deep breath. Even family members I trusted implicitly began to act oddly. Conversations that once flowed naturally now had tiny pauses, awkward glances, brief whispers exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. I caught a relative brushing their hand over a stack of papers quickly, as if hiding something, and when our eyes met, they laughed nervously, a little too loudly. I forced a smile back, pretending not to notice, but my mind began cataloging these moments like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't yet ready to solve. There were nights I couldn't sleep, lying awake and replaying interactions in my mind. I remembered a voicemail I had found accidentally, a voice unfamiliar, yet intimate, clipped and polite, leaving a message that seemed innocent but resonated strangely in my chest. I tried to rationalize it. Wrong number, a misdial. But the feeling of disquiet refused to let go. It was a quiet, insistent whisper telling me that something beneath the surface wasn't as it appeared. Even the small routines of daily life had begun to feel slightly off. Grocery lists that were incomplete, errands left unmentioned, invitations I hadn't received. Nothing overt, nothing undeniably malicious, but enough to make me question whether someone close to me was deliberately keeping things hidden. I felt a creeping sense of betrayal, not yet fully formed, but growing, and it gnawed at the edges of my otherwise content mind. One afternoon, I noticed my partner disappearing into the back room with their laptop, the door closing quietly behind them. The click of the lock sounded unusually loud, almost deliberate. Minutes passed, and when they emerged, they carried themselves as if nothing had happened. A bright smile plastered across their face. I remembered the smell of coffee lingering too strongly in the room, a smell that had already been there before, yet somehow different. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a flicker of suspicion I couldn't ignore. There were subtle changes in their demeanor, too. A hesitation before answering simple questions. A nervous laugh that came too quickly. Hands fidgeting with rings or hair, gestures that had never belonged to them before. And yet, the warmth I had always associated with their presence remained, just barely. It was a strange mix of familiarity and unease, comfort and warning, all wrapped into one. Friends and extended family started acting a little strangely as well. Casual comments delivered with double meanings, odd looks when certain topics arose, laughter that seemed forced. I noticed how the same relative who always seemed cheerful now lingered in corners of the room, whispering to someone, then glancing toward me as if gauging my reaction. I couldn't hear what they said, but the intensity of their focus made my chest tighten in quiet dread. Even my child, blissfully unaware, began asking unusual questions. Small remarks like, "Who's that on the phone?" or "Why is Annie looking at me like that?" seemed innocent at the time, but I filed them away in the back of my mind. Their tone was curious, probing, and I realized that children, sensitive in ways adults forget, could sense things I was only beginning to grasp. Their instinct had always been sharp, and now I trusted it even more than my own. Late at night, I found myself walking the house quietly, listening for sounds that might explain my growing discomfort. The faint hum of a television left on in another room, a soft shuffle of movement when no one was supposed to be awake, the barely audible vibration of a phone left unattended. All of it chipped away at the sense of security I'd taken for granted. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer, suspicions I couldn't yet prove. I started noticing small inconsistencies in stories, the tiny gaps that didn't fit together neatly. A trip to the store that never happened, a conversation that ended abruptly, a promise that seemed forgotten as if erased from memory. Each small detail, insignificant on its own, began to stitch a pattern in my mind, a pattern that whispered of deceit, of hidden truths, of things that were being kept from me deliberately. By the end of these weeks, the tension had become a constant hum in my chest. Even amidst the excitement of preparations for my child's birthday, I felt a shadow of doubt hovering nearby. Every interaction, every smile, every casual word was tinged with suspicion, and I realized I was no longer simply observing my family. I was examining them, watching for hints, listening for slips, waiting for the moment when all the subtle signs I had noticed would finally coalesce into something undeniable. And though the unease was quiet, it was persistent. It nested itself in the corners of my mind, tugging at my attention even as I tried to focus on the bright balloons, the soft laughter, the scent of vanilla and syrup. Something was wrong. I knew, though I couldn't yet name it, and in that knowledge a small, stubborn resolve began to form. I would not let it go unnoticed. The days after noticing the first red flags felt heavier than usual. Even in ordinary moments, I could feel a tension tightening around my chest, a low, insistent pressure that wouldn't let me relax. Simple conversations with my partner began to feel like tests, casual remarks carrying double meanings I could no longer ignore. I wanted to believe, desperately, that it was nothing, but the unease refused to leave. I began noticing small inconsistencies everywhere. A story about Aaron's run would change subtly depending on who was listening. A laugh that had once felt warm now felt rehearsed, carefully timed. Their eyes would flit to my direction for just a fraction too long, as if measuring my reaction, calculating what I knew. I felt a slow burn of suspicion, like fire catching and kindling I hadn't noticed until it was too close to the walls. Even family gatherings began to feel strained. I remember one evening at dinner when a relative offered a casual comment about something that had never happened. Or had it? My mind spun, trying to reconcile the words with memory, but the feeling of dissonance settled in my chest and stayed there. I noticed the way my partner's fingers drummed nervously against the table, a subtle rhythm of unease, and I realized I was seeing behavior I had ignored in the past. The more I observed, the more the patterns became impossible to dismiss. Invitations were suddenly miscommunicated. Messages were left unsent. Excuses were delivered quickly, with a little too much defensiveness, as if rehearsed. My trust, once so instinctive, began to fray. I found myself questioning the motives behind every word, every smile, every gesture. Each small deviation from what I expected gnawed at the foundation of certainty I had once taken for granted. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach lurch. A text on a phone screen, hastily silenced, the sender's name obscured as my partner's hand fell over it. I pretended not to notice, forcing a casual smile, but my heart thudded hard against my ribs. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen. Yet even that comforting aroma couldn't calm the tight coil of tension rising inside me. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but instinct told me otherwise. Arguments that would have once seemed trivial began to carry weight. Minor disagreements over household chores or weekend plans felt charged, heavy with an unspoken undercurrent. I noticed subtle defensive gestures, crossed arms, tightened jawlines, eyes avoiding mine. Each moment of friction, small as it seemed, added to the slow erosion of trust, a gradual unraveling that no one else in the house seemed to notice. Even my child, blissfully unaware, could feel it. Their laughter seemed lighter, yes, but they occasionally hesitated before speaking or glanced at certain relatives with a curiosity that hinted at their own perception of unease. I realized that children often sense what adults cannot name. Their instincts, untainted by politeness or denial, mirrored my own growing discomfort. I felt a surge of protectiveness, mingled with frustration, as if I were suddenly responsible for not just observing, but defending my child from invisible threats. At night, I replayed the small moments over and over, each one a piece of a puzzle I didn't yet fully understand. A phrase said too quickly, a gesture that seemed rehearsed, a fleeting look exchanged between two adults that froze in my memory. I realized I was analyzing behaviors I had once accepted without thought, and in doing so, I became more attuned to the subtle manipulations I had previously ignored. It wasn't just suspicion, it was the feeling that someone was actively shaping events behind my back. A plate shifted just slightly on the counter. A drawer that I knew had been closed left ajar. The faint hum of a conversation that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. Each detail, individually trivial, began to form a mosaic of deception that tightened its grip on my mind. I felt the weight of realization pressing on me. I could no longer trust what I saw or heard without questioning it. I tried to confront my feelings gently, reminding myself of the love that had always existed in this home. I wanted to believe that everything was ordinary, that my fears were simply paranoia fueled by exhaustion. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I noticed small signals I could not unsee. A phone call answered too quickly. A name whispered in a way meant to be unheard. A glance that lingered just a moment too long. Even simple acts of affection began to feel clouded. Hugs felt slightly rehearsed. Smiles carried a hint of calculation. Conversations, once effortless, were now peppered with subtle tension, with unspoken truths hovering just beyond my grasp. My mind raced constantly, piecing together these fragments, trying to decipher what lay beneath the surface. And yet, amidst the growing unease, there was a resolve forming quietly inside me. I would observe. I would remember. I would notice the smallest details, the subtle slips. Trust may have been fraying, but my determination to uncover the truth was solidifying. I knew, deep down, that the first red flags were not to be ignored, that each moment of tension was a signal, a whisper that the life I thought I knew was quietly shifting beneath my feet. The doorbell rang just as the morning light began to soften into a warm glow. Guests started trickling in, smiles in place, arms full of wrapped presents and balloons. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Laughter, greetings, hugs exchanged. But as soon as I opened the door and welcomed the first few arrivals, that familiar tightness returned to my chest, a silent warning that all was not as it seemed. The house was filled with cheerful chatter, the sound bouncing off walls decorated with balloons and streamers. I heard the soft rustle of wrapping paper and the faint scent of flowers that someone had brought, mingling with the warm aroma of the cake I had set aside. My child ran between the living room and the kitchen, squealing with delight. And for a moment, I allowed myself to bask in their joy. And yet, the unease lingered, quiet but persistent, crawling beneath the surface of my carefully curated celebration. I noticed the same relative from before, moving among the guests with that practiced smile. Their laughter sounded slightly sharper than it had in the weeks leading up to the party. Every time they spoke to someone, they leaned in just a little too close, their eyes flicking briefly toward me before returning to the conversation. I forced myself to smile and nod, pretending everything was normal, but my mind was on high alert. Small things began to catch my attention almost immediately. A misplaced gift bag in the corner of the living room. A note folded carelessly on the dining table. Minor discrepancies that no one else seemed to notice, but to me, they felt like cracks in the perfect veneer I had so carefully constructed. I couldn't explain it, but the way my gut tightened every time I saw these tiny irregularities told me that something was being hidden. Guests mingled in clusters, children running between legs, laughter ringing through the house. I tried to engage fully, helping with snacks and drinks, smiling at jokes, but my eyes kept returning to the relative who had always seemed a little too charming. Their movements were precise, deliberate, almost rehearsed. They brushed past the kitchen counter, glancing quickly at the phone I had set aside, then straightened their posture as if nothing had happened. I caught a glimpse of my partner talking quietly to that same relative, their expressions carefully neutral, voices soft. The conversation stopped abruptly as my eyes met theirs, smiles flashing quickly before resuming a cheerful facade. There was a tension there, subtle but undeniable, a vibration in the room that made my skin prickle. The laughter and music couldn't mask it, and I felt a hollow ache of anxiety settle deep in my chest. I tried to focus on my child, who was chasing bubbles in the yard, sunlight glinting off their hair. The sheer innocence of their joy was grounding. But even then, I noticed small hesitations. A glance over the shoulder, a momentary pause mid-laugh, fleeting, and almost imperceptible. My protective instincts surged. I wanted to shield them from the tension I was beginning to perceive, from the unspoken secrets lurking just out of view. The first tangible sign that something was off came when I noticed a stack of napkins slightly out of place, their edges uneven against the table. I reached out to straighten them, and in that brief motion, I saw the reflection of a face in the window, a fleeting expression, sharp and careful, watching me. When I turned, no one was there. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was a trick of light or my imagination, but the knot of suspicion in my stomach tightened. I moved into the kitchen, setting out plates and utensils, and heard snippets of conversation from the living room. Words I couldn't fully catch, sentences that stopped mid-thought as someone noticed my presence. My ears strained, catching the faint vibration of whispers and the shuffle of papers. It wasn't concrete, not yet, but it was enough to make me pause, to feel that invisible line of deception inching closer. The birthday cake, decorated with colorful frosting and candles, stood proudly on the counter. I touched the edge of the plate, feeling the smooth surface beneath my fingers, and breathed in the sweet aroma. The room looked perfect, the balloons swaying gently, the sunlight highlighting the decorations, but my eyes, sharpened by weeks of unease, caught the small inconsistencies. Gifts stacked unevenly, a chair slightly askew, a soft murmur that cut off too quickly. Even amidst the cheerful chaos, my attention was divided. I smiled at guests, laughed at jokes, and hugged relatives as I guided children to games and activities. Yet every so often, my gaze would snap to the same subtle gestures I had been noticing for weeks. The forced laugh, the flickering glance, the too perfect smile. A pattern was emerging, small but persistent, and I realized that the perfect party I had envisioned was beginning to crack in ways I couldn't ignore. By mid-morning, the house was alive with celebration, yet I couldn't shake the sense that something hidden was pulsing just beneath the surface. Every movement, every word, every glance seemed to carry a weight I hadn't felt before. And as I stood near the kitchen counter, watching my child play and the guests mingle, I felt the first real stirrings of curiosity, a need to observe more closely, to notice every detail, to uncover whatever lay behind the practiced smiles and careful gestures. I could see happen just as I was guiding a group of children toward the backyard for a game. Their laughter carried on the warm morning air, but my ears caught something sharper, a fragment of sound that didn't belong in the playful chaos. It was a whisper, so quiet that I almost thought I imagined it, but my instinct screamed that I hadn't. I froze mid-step, straining to catch the words. I edged closer to the doorway of the living room, careful not to draw attention. My heart beat faster, a steady drum of anticipation and dread. There they were, the relative I'd been noticing for weeks, leaning in toward my partner, voices low, cautious, each word carefully chosen. I couldn't hear everything, just fragments. Make sure doesn't find out tomorrow. The words hit me like a stone in the chest, heavy and cold. I pressed myself against the wall, willing my presence to remain unnoticed. The whispering continued, a delicate thread of secrecy woven with tension. We can't risk them knowing. It would ruin everything. Their hands moved slightly, almost brushing, in a gesture too subtle for anyone else to notice. My stomach churned, and a wave of heat flushed my face. Something hidden, something deliberate, was unfolding right before me. The room smelled faintly of coffee and vanilla from the cake, comforting scents that now felt strangely hollow. I noticed the way their eyes shifted constantly, scanning the room as if the walls themselves were watching. Every gesture was calculated, precise, and I felt a knot tighten in my chest. The whispers were soft, but the meaning was clear. There was a secret, and it was being protected carefully, deliberately. I backed away slightly, pretending to adjust a balloon, my fingers brushing the smooth latex as I tried to appear casual. Yet every part of me was alert, every sense focused on catching more, understanding more. The snippets of conversation were like shards of glass, each one cutting deeper into the sense of normalcy I had clung to for weeks. I realized suddenly that the web of deception I had sensed was real and present, and it had been hiding in plain sight all along. I caught a glimpse of a small folded piece of paper slipping from my partner's pocket, their hand darting to retrieve it quickly. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. My heart raced. I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat. I had to observe, to understand fully before I could act. The whispers continued, too soft to hear clearly, but heavy with intent. The children's laughter in the yard provided a strange contrast, a reminder of innocence and joy that now felt fragile, threatened. I glanced at my child, chasing a balloon, their hair glinting in the sunlight, completely unaware of the tension threading through the room. I felt a surge of protective instinct. Whatever was being hidden wasn't just about me. It could touch them, it could change everything, and I would not allow it to go unchecked. I inched closer, heart hammering, listening for more fragments. After the party, handle it carefully, no one can know, they mustn't find out. Each partial sentence sharpened the ache in my chest. My mind raced, piecing together possibilities, weighing the implications, trying to predict what could be hidden so carefully, so deliberately. I could feel the betrayal forming like a shadow over the bright morning. The relative glanced briefly in my direction, though they didn't see me pressed against the wall. Their expression flickered, a micro-expression of tension that confirmed my worst fears. They were aware of the danger of being discovered. My pulse quickened. I had seen the cracks in their behavior before, noticed the rehearsed smiles and evasive gestures. But now I understood that those small inconsistencies were part of a deliberate effort to hide something significant. The whispers tapered off, the words swallowed into cautious laughter and casual chatter as they returned to the group, smiles back in place. My knees felt weak, my hands clammy, yet a quiet resolve began to form. I had caught a glimpse of something hidden, something that had been carefully kept from me. The betrayal was real, and though I didn't yet know the full extent, the first pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. I stepped away from the wall, pretending to adjust a party decoration, trying to steady my breathing. The sunlight glinted off the balloons, the soft scent of vanilla still lingering, yet the beauty of the morning now felt tainted. I realized, with a mixture of fear and determination, that I would need to watch more closely, to gather more evidence, to uncover the truth fully. Nothing would remain hidden once I decided to see it clearly. Even as I returned to helping with snacks and guiding the children, the whispers echoed in my mind. The sense of safety I had felt for so long had shattered, replaced by a careful vigilance. I understood, for the first time with clarity, that something in our family was being hidden from me, and that uncovering it would require patience, observation, and courage. The morning continued on the surface as joyous and bright, but underneath, a new tension had taken root, threading itself through the very heart of the house. It was while I was straightening up the dining table that I saw it. A small, folded note tucked under a stack of birthday cards. At first, I didn't recognize it. The edges were crisp, the paper thin, almost fragile, and I hesitated before touching it. Something in my chest tightened as I lifted it gently, careful not to disturb the rest of the carefully arranged presents. The handwriting was familiar, unmistakably my partner's, but the words made my stomach turn. I couldn't read everything at once. My eyes caught phrases that didn't belong in the story of our life together. Meet tomorrow. Don't tell anyone. It has to stay a secret. Couldn't risk them finding out. The words stabbed at me, each one heavier than the last, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I held the note, frozen, my hand trembling slightly. The smell of ink mingled with the faint scent of vanilla from the birthday cake, a strange contrast between sweetness and betrayal. I tried to steady my breathing, to tell myself that perhaps I was misreading things, that maybe it was nothing, but my intuition had never been wrong before. The evidence was tangible, undeniable, and my heart sank with the weight of realization. The room around me seemed to blur. Children ran past, laughter ringing out, balloons swaying gently, the warm sunlight casting familiar patterns across the floor. Yet all of it felt distant, a backdrop to the sharp, bright ache of betrayal. My mind raced, replaying interactions from the past weeks, noticing all the subtle behaviors I had dismissed, the evasive glances, the whispered conversations, the nervous movements. Every detail suddenly made sense. I folded the note carefully, my fingers pressing into the paper as if trying to absorb its meaning, and I felt a rush of anger I couldn't control. Not directed at my child, not at the guests, but at the person I had trusted most. The one who had smiled, who had held me, who had shared a life with me, all while keeping this secret hidden. My chest felt tight, my throat heavy, and tears threatened to fall, unbidden and bitter. I thought about the weeks leading up to today, all the subtle inconsistencies I had noticed. Late texts, secretive phone calls, rehearsed smiles. Everything pointed to the same truth, now confirmed in this single, folded piece of paper. The weight of deception pressed down on me, relentless, and for the first time, I felt the full extent of the betrayal in a way that words alone could never convey. I slipped the note into my pocket, my hands still shaking, and tried to ground myself in the ordinary tasks around me. The cupcakes needed arranging. The drinks had to be topped off. Children were laughing, my child's small voice calling out excitedly. I took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet aroma of frosting and fresh flowers, and tried to focus on the external world while my mind churned with internal turmoil. The more I thought about it, the more pieces clicked into place. Every small detail I had noticed, the too perfect laughter, the tense glances, the minor missteps, had been a thread leading me here. The realization hit me with a clarity that was almost unbearable. Someone I had trusted completely had deliberately hidden a part of their life, manipulating moments and conversations, carefully weaving a secret into the fabric of our everyday existence. I glanced toward my partner, who was chatting casually with a relative, their movements fluid, their smiles seemingly effortless. On the surface, they appeared unchanged, yet I now saw every gesture with new eyes. The subtle tension in their shoulders, the way they leaned just slightly toward the other person while speaking, the fleeting flicker of a worried expression. All of it was part of a pattern I could no longer ignore. My mind raced with questions, possibilities, and fears. How long had this been going on? Who else knew? What did it mean for the life we had built together, for the family we had worked so hard to protect? The note was more than paper. It was proof of a deception that stretched beyond the present moment, reaching into days, weeks, perhaps even months I had spent believing in a reality that never truly existed. I felt a mixture of disbelief, hurt, and a deep, simmering anger. It was one thing to sense that something was wrong. It was another to hold the evidence in my hands, to see the truth spelled out so plainly, so deliberately. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was tactile. It was undeniable, and it demanded a response, though I wasn't yet sure what form that would take. Even as the party continued around me, laughter and chatter filling the air, I felt a profound sense of isolation. No one else could know what I had discovered. For now, the secret remained mine alone, a heavy weight pressing against my ribs. I tucked the note safely away, my hands finally stilling, and allowed myself a quiet, trembling resolve. I would not let this go unanswered. I would find the full truth, no matter what it took. The balloons swayed softly in the sunlight, the scent of vanilla lingering in the air. I glanced at my child, their small hand gripping mine, eyes bright and trusting. And in that moment, the mixture of love, protectiveness, and betrayal intertwined into a single, sharp determination. This secret could not touch them. I would uncover it fully, and I would do it carefully, thoughtfully, with patience and precision. I tried to act normal, moving through the party with practiced ease, but inside, I was tense, every nerve alert. The note I had found burned in my pocket like a secret flame, a constant reminder of the betrayal I had just uncovered. I told myself I couldn't confront anyone outright. Not yet. Not without knowing everything. I needed to observe, to test, to gather pieces of the puzzle before making a move. I approached my partner casually, smiling as if nothing had changed, my hand brushing against the smooth edge of the table. "Did you see the new decorations?" I asked, keeping my tone light, even playful. I watched closely as they answered, noting every flicker of expression, every slight hesitation. Their smile remained bright, but I saw the tiny twitch at the corner of their mouth, the subtle tightening around the eyes. Something was off. As the guests chatted and children played, I asked seemingly innocuous questions. Questions about plans, about errands, about people who had been mentioned before. Each time, I studied their reactions carefully. There were slight pauses, eyes darting just a fraction too quickly, hands adjusting clothing or brushing hair nervously. Nothing overt, nothing to accuse them of, but the patterns I had noticed in the weeks leading up to the party were all present, and they confirmed the unease in my chest. I caught myself holding my breath as they leaned in to speak to a relative, their voice low but clipped. I moved closer under the pretense of arranging the cake table, pretending to be busy. The words they muttered, carefully chosen, quick, almost rehearsed, were just fragments, but each one sent a jolt through me. After, "make sure," they don't see even without full context, I could feel the weight of deception pressing down. I tried to remind myself to stay calm. The children were running around, laughter bright and innocent, and I wanted to focus on that, to mask my inner turmoil. But every movement, every glance, every word from my partner now carried a hidden meaning. I found myself reading subtle micro-expressions, the way their shoulders tensed, the brief tightening of their jaw, the way their hands lingered on a glass longer than necessary. I had become hyper-aware, almost painfully so, of everything that could signal deceit. One small slip caught my attention, a phone that buzzed quietly in a pocket. My partner glanced at it and immediately tucked it away, their reaction just slightly too quick, too practiced. I noticed the faint creases of worry that hadn't been there before, the shift in posture that betrayed a hint of panic. My chest tightened further, a mix of anger and disbelief, but I forced myself to maintain composure, speaking to guests and guiding children as if nothing were wrong. I remembered every seemingly minor inconsistency I had seen in the past weeks. The unexplained absences, the secretive calls, the rehearsed smiles. Now, they all came together, a pattern impossible to ignore. And yet, as I watched my partner, pretending to be part of the joyful chaos, I felt a surge of frustration. How had they managed to hide so much for so long? How had they masked it all behind charm and routine? I decided to ask a question, carefully testing the waters. "Did you happen to see Aunt Lisa's message earlier?" I asked, casual, almost indifferent. I observed their reaction, noting the brief flicker of hesitation, the way their eyes darted to the side, searching for a lifeline. The answer came, smooth and rehearsed, but the tiny slip, the ever-so-brief pause, the micro-expression barely visible, spoke volumes. I felt a mix of vindication and dread, realizing that the deception was far more deliberate than I had imagined. Throughout the room, laughter and chatter continued, the bright sunlight catching on decorations and bouncing off the walls. Yet beneath the surface, a tension had begun to radiate, almost imperceptible but undeniable. I saw subtle shifts in other relatives as well, the way they glanced at each other, the soft, careful modulation of voices. It was as if the web of deception had begun to ripple outward, affecting everyone in small, almost invisible ways. By mid-afternoon, the sense of unease had settled firmly over me. I realized that the confrontation I had initiated, subtle, cautious, indirect, was beginning to yield information. I didn't yet have answers, but I was seeing the cracks, the slips, the faint glimpses of truth that had been hidden behind smiles and normalcy. And though my heart ached with betrayal, I felt a spark of control forming. I could observe, I could gather, and soon I would understand fully what had been kept from me. Even as the birthday party continued, laughter mingling with the hum of activity. I stood quietly in the background, eyes sharp, senses heightened. I knew the deception was bigger than I had imagined, but I also knew that careful observation, patience, and attention to detail would allow me to uncover the truth. And in that moment, beneath the surface of celebration and joy, I felt a grim determination settle over me, readying myself for the revelations that were yet to come by the end of the party. The house was quieting down, the children exhausted and scattered in corners, dozing or quietly playing. I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe, to sit down, and to think. The whispered conversations, the folded note, the tiny slips I had observed all began to align in my mind, forming a pattern that had been invisible for years. The web of lies was larger than I could have imagined. I thought back over the past months, even years. Little inconsistencies that I had dismissed as coincidences now glared at me with undeniable clarity. Late-night outings, excuses that didn't make sense, unexplained gifts, and odd phone calls. All of it fit together. I realized that the trust one had so easily given had been manipulated, woven into a story designed to hide the truth. Memories that had once brought warmth now felt tainted. Birthday mornings, holidays, even simple nights of laughter and games. They were all tinged with subtle deception, moments carefully crafted to appear ordinary. I could see now how smoothly the lies had been integrated into our lives, hidden within patterns of love and care. It was as if I'd been watching a play my whole life, unaware that the actors were following a script I could never have imagined. I began to reconstruct the timeline, connecting details I had ignored or misinterpreted. A visit to a relative's house that ended abruptly. A conversation overheard but quickly dismissed. Notes hidden or deleted. The pieces fell into place with a precision that was both horrifying and illuminating. Someone had been orchestrating events behind the scenes, carefully, methodically, leaving traces only a vigilant eye could detect. Even more startling was the realization that this wasn't the work of one night or 1 week. It had been going on for years. The patterns, the manipulations, the careful concealment of truth, they weren't mistakes. They were deliberate, repeated, and designed to protect a secret I had been blind to for far too long. The magnitude of the betrayal pressed down on me, a weight that made it difficult to breathe. I remembered the small gestures, the inconsistencies, the fleeting expressions I had noticed during past gatherings. Every seemingly minor slip now appeared significant. The subtle nervousness, the brief eye contact avoided, the rehearsed smiles, they all made sense in a new context. My partner and the relative I had observed weren't simply hiding minor mistakes. They were hiding a reality that had quietly eroded the foundation of our family. Anger surged, sharp and immediate, mingled with heartbreak. I felt betrayed not only by the actions themselves, but by the careful planning behind them. Someone I had trusted implicitly had chosen deception over honesty, secrecy over transparency, and I was left to reckon with the consequences. The note, the whispers, the inconsistencies, all confirmed what I had feared. This was a betrayal that had been building silently for years. I could feel my mind sharpening, piecing together possibilities, evaluating motives. Why had they done this? Who else was involved, knowingly or unknowingly? The complexity of the deception began to emerge, each new detail adding layers of depth and anguish. I realized that the truth was far more intricate than a single misstep or hidden message. It was a network of lies spanning relationships, time, and trust itself. I thought about my child, so innocent and unaware, and felt a surge of protectiveness. This web of lies wasn't just a personal betrayal. It threatened the stability of our entire family. I couldn't allow it to continue unchallenged. The love I felt for my child sharpened my focus, turning grief into determination. I had to understand every piece of the puzzle, every hidden thread, before deciding what steps to take next. As the house quieted further, I began making notes in my mind, cataloging every incident, every behavior, every fragment of evidence I'd gathered. I saw how small inconsistencies formed a chain that could no longer be ignored. Each detail was a clue, a signpost pointing to the truth I was now compelled to uncover. The realization that the deception spanned years intensified both the pain and the resolve within me. I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and clarity. The initial shock had passed, leaving space for strategic thought. The web of lies was unraveled in my mind, its threads visible and distinct, yet the emotions it evoked, anger, heartbreak, disbelief, remained raw and vivid. I understood, finally, the full scope of what had been done and who had been involved, whether intentionally or unwittingly. And yet, despite the intensity of emotion, there was a quiet focus settling in. I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing, mentally assembling the steps I would take, the observations I would make, the confrontation I would craft. The betrayal was immense, the pain real, but I felt a sense of control returning. I knew that with patience, intelligence, and careful observation, I could navigate this storm and uncover every hidden truth. By the time the last guest had left and the house fell silent, I was exhausted, drained, and still trembling. But I also felt an unmistakable clarity. The lies had been unmasked in my mind, if not yet fully in the world around me. I had seen the pattern, understood the scale, and knew the next steps required both courage and careful strategy. The web of deceit had been vast, but I now held the thread that could untangle it completely. It was late that evening, after the house had emptied and the balloons swayed gently in the dim light, that I confronted the truth fully. The fragments, the whispers, the hidden note, they all converged in my mind like pieces of a puzzle, finally forming a complete picture. What I had sensed for weeks now revealed itself with brutal clarity. The betrayal wasn't small, it wasn't trivial, it was deliberate, and it struck at the heart of everything I had trusted. I sat in the quiet living room, my hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, trying to steady the racing of my heart. The notes, the whispered conversations, even the subtle gestures I had noticed during the party, they all pointed to the same conclusion. My partner, the person I had trusted above all others, had been actively concealing a reality that threatened the stability of our family. The depth of the deception left me stunned, and a hollow ache settled in my chest. I remembered the birthday morning, the way everything had seemed perfect, while small details gnawed at me. The forced smiles, the glances that lingered too long, the little inconsistencies. I realized now that each one had been a signpost, a breadcrumb leading me toward a truth I wasn't yet ready to face. And yet, here it was undeniable. The loyalty I had assumed was mutual had fractured in the most profound way. My mind cycled through emotions rapidly. Shock, anger, disbelief, grief. I felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted, as though the reality I had known had been built on shifting sand. The person I had loved, trusted, and confided in had hidden a secret so significant that it cast a shadow over every memory, every shared moment, every future plan. My heart ached, not only for myself, but for my child, whose innocence had been unknowingly entangled in the web of lies. I tried to understand motives, a dangerous but necessary exercise. Why had this been done? Was it selfishness, fear, or something darker? The idea that deception could be deliberate, carefully orchestrated over months or years, sent a shiver through me. I thought about the carefully constructed facade, the rehearsed smiles, the manipulated conversations. Each had been a tool, a means to conceal reality, and I felt the sting of betrayal sharpen with every memory. Questions spun relentlessly in my mind. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? Who else had been involved, even unknowingly, in maintaining the illusion? The depth of planning and calculation implied a level of intentionality that left me reeling. And yet, beneath the anger, a strange clarity began to emerge. I could see the patterns now, the repeated behaviors, the subtle manipulations, all of which revealed more than just a single act of deceit. They revealed a mindset, a deliberate decision to place secrecy above loyalty. The realization hit hardest when I thought about my child. Their laughter, so bright and unguarded, now carried a bittersweet edge. I felt a surge of protectiveness, an intense desire to shield them from the fallout I now understood was inevitable. The betrayal wasn't simply personal. It threatened the emotional foundation of our family. And yet, despite the devastation, I felt a glimmer of resolve. I would protect my child. I would understand fully before taking any steps, but I would not allow this deception to continue unchecked. I replayed interactions in my mind, evenings spent together that now carried hidden undertones, conversations that had seemed innocent but were laden with omission. Even mundane gestures, the tilt of a head, the way a hand rested on a table, took on new meaning. It was as if every ordinary moment had been infused with subtle signals, all designed to mislead. And yet, with the clarity of understanding came a cautious sense of empowerment. I could see the web. I could see the lines of deception. I could see the truth behind the smiles. The anger was tempered by grief. I mourned the trust that had been broken, the illusions of loyalty, the life I had believed we shared. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the collapse of a reality I had held sacred. And yet, even in this grief, I recognized the necessity of control. I had to act deliberately, think strategically, and protect what mattered most. Rash action could harm my child, worsen the situation, or allow the deception to continue. Patience, intelligence, and careful observation were my only allies. I began evaluating what this betrayal meant for the future. The person I had trusted implicitly could no longer hold the same place in my life, at least not without accountability. Boundaries needed to be redefined, trust recalibrated, and consequences considered carefully. My role was no longer passive. I had to assess, plan, and act with both caution and precision, ensuring that the lies could not spread further or continue unchallenged. By the time night fully settled, a grim determination had taken root. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds outside. The betrayal had shattered loyalty, leaving a raw void, but it had also illuminated the path forward. I understood now that awareness, patience, and strategic thought were essential. The trust one had once given blindly had been violated, but my resolve to protect my family and uncover the full truth had never been stronger. I allowed myself a quiet, bitter breath, feeling the weight of grief and anger, but also the clarity of purpose. Loyalty had been shattered, trust had been broken, and yet, in the shadow of that devastation, I felt the first stirrings of resolve. The knowledge that the next steps would be deliberate, intelligent, and guided by a fierce, protective love for my child. The path ahead was uncertain, painful, and necessary. And I was ready that it was late that night. The house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood, that I finally confronted the truth head-on. I sat at the edge of the living room sofa, the note still clutched in my hand, and felt the weight of years of deception press down on me. I had suspected, pieced together fragments, and tested reactions, but what I discovered now left me utterly stunned. The secret wasn't minor. It wasn't a simple omission or a fleeting indiscretion. My partner had been hiding an entire aspect of their life, a hidden relationship, carefully compartmentalized, meticulously shielded from me and from the life we had built together. It wasn't just the fact of a secret. It was the sheer scale of it, the lengths they had gone to protect it, and the deliberate choice to deceive me at every turn. I remember the note again, the carefully folded words that had triggered this chain of discovery. Meet tomorrow. Don't tell anyone. It has to stay a secret. Couldn't risk them finding out. Each phrase now carried a weight I had only begun to comprehend. This wasn't an isolated act. It had been maintained over months, even years, layered carefully beneath ordinary routines, birthday mornings, and shared holidays. Every small inconsistency I had noticed now fell into place. Shock hit me first, a cold, gripping force that made my hands tremble and my chest tighten. I couldn't breathe for a moment. the room spinning slightly as if the walls themselves were shifting. My child's laughter from earlier that day echoed faintly in my mind, an innocent sound I could never allow to be tainted by this revelation. I felt the full magnitude of the betrayal, the extent of the trust that had been violated. Grief followed quickly, deep and raw. I mourned the honesty I had expected, the loyalty I had assumed, and the life I had believed we shared. Memories I had cherished, quiet mornings, birthdays, evenings spent laughing on the couch, now carried a bitter undertone. I felt the sting of each smile I had once trusted, now reframed as part of a carefully constructed facade. It was as if the foundation beneath my life had cracked, leaving me suspended above a reality I could barely recognize. And then came clarity. Once the shock and grief began to settle, I could see everything with sharp precision. The subtle glances, the whispered conversations, the carefully timed absences, all of it formed a coherent picture. I understood the pattern, the deliberate orchestration, and the calculated effort that had gone into keeping this secret from me. The clarity was painful, but necessary. I could finally see the scope of the deception, the threads that had been woven to mask a hidden truth. Anger surged next, fierce and undeniable. It wasn't just betrayal. It was intentional, a choice made with full awareness. Every lie, every omission, every carefully rehearsed smile was evidence of a calculated effort to manipulate, to conceal, and to protect a reality at odds with the life we had built. I felt it deep in my bones, the sharp edge of betrayal cutting through my confidence, my trust, and my sense of safety. But alongside anger, a strange sense of control began to emerge. I knew the truth now. I had pieced together every clue, observed every micro-expression, and connected the dots that had previously seemed disconnected. The deception was no longer invisible, no longer capable of hiding in the shadows. Knowledge had given me power, and with it came the ability to act with deliberation rather than reaction. I thought about my child, bright-eyed and innocent, and felt a surge of protective determination. Whatever I did next, it had to be measured, intelligent, and careful. The secret I had uncovered wasn't just a personal betrayal. It threatened the emotional stability of our family, the trust my child placed in the world around them. I knew that impulsive action could cause more harm than good, and so I began to plan, mentally mapping the steps I would take to address the deception. As the night deepened, I allowed myself to feel fully the range of emotions: shock, grief, anger, and finally, a sense of clarity and purpose. The weight of the secret had pressed down on me for months, but now that I held the truth in my mind and understood its full scope, I could begin to navigate the path forward. I knew what had been hidden, who had been involved, and the impact it could have on the family I loved most. There was a strange catharsis in finally knowing, even though the knowledge was bitter. The uncertainty, the gnawing suspicion, the constant tension, all of it had been replaced by clear understanding. I could see the lies for what they were, and I could see the responsibility I now carried: to protect my child, to confront the deception thoughtfully, and to restore balance to a life that had been shaken to its core. Even in the stillness of the night, with the house quiet and the faint glow of the streetlights casting shadows through the windows, I felt a mixture of grief and resolve. The truth had been revealed, painful and devastating as it was, but it had also given me direction. I would not act rashly. I would observe, plan, and respond with intelligence and care. The betrayal had been profound, but my path forward was now illuminated by the clarity of the truth. I finally set the note down on the table, my fingers lingering on its edges for a moment. The room smelled faintly of the vanilla cake from earlier, a comforting reminder of the day's celebrations, now tinged with the bittersweet taste of revelation. I leaned back, letting out a slow, shuddering breath, and allowed myself the quiet understanding that despite the shock and grief, I had discovered the reality that had been hidden. The truth was out, and I could now prepare for the steps necessary to protect what mattered most. The next morning, the house felt different, as if the walls themselves were aware of the truth, I now carried. I moved carefully, every step deliberate, every glance purposeful, knowing that the person who had betrayed me was still under the illusion that I was unaware. But I had a plan now, subtle, precise, and designed to let the truth reveal itself without a direct accusation. I started small, asking casual questions in front of the family. "Did you notice Aunt Lisa's message last night?" I asked, my tone light but pointed. My partner's eyes flickered, and for the first time, I noticed a micro-expression that betrayed tension. The slightest tightening around the mouth, the brief shift in posture. I didn't confront them outright, but I allowed the moment to linger, letting the question hover like a faint shadow over the room. I watched them interact with others, observing carefully. Every smile, every nod, every gesture became a potential signpost, revealing cracks that had previously been invisible. They moved through the house as if nothing had changed, but I saw the subtle hesitations, the calculated pauses, and the careful avoidance of eye contact with certain relatives. The truth had begun to ripple outward, touching everyone in ways they didn't fully realize. I orchestrated small moments where information could no longer be hidden. I left subtle hints, placed reminders in plain sight, and allowed conversations to drift into areas that forced honesty. One by one, the careful facade began to slip. Guests noticed too, the way my partner avoided certain topics, the tension in their voice when a casual remark accidentally hit too close to the truth. The room was filled with polite smiles, but underneath, a web of deception was unraveling. The most satisfying moment came unexpectedly. While helping clear some dishes, I casually mentioned an incident from the past few weeks, something only the betrayer and I had known. I watched as their face paled slightly, eyes widening before recovering into a forced expression. The shift was almost imperceptible to anyone else, but I saw it clearly. The first crack in the mask had appeared, and I felt a mix of satisfaction and grim determination. I continued to guide interactions, subtly controlling the flow of conversation so that the deception could not hide behind social niceties. I asked about past plans, about small promises, and about meetings that had seemed trivial at the time. Each question was innocuous, designed to draw out honesty without creating overt conflict. And each time, the betrayer stumbled, just slightly, revealing more than they intended. There was an almost surgical precision to the way I orchestrated the exposure. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse, I didn't create a scene. Instead, I allowed the truth to surface naturally, letting the reactions of others reinforce the reality I had uncovered. Subtle glances, hushed murmurs, and the careful observation of expressions became my tools. The person who had hidden so much now found themselves navigating a room where their lies could no longer protect them. My child remained blissfully unaware of the tension threading through the adults around them. Their laughter was a steady, grounding presence, reminding me why I had undertaken this careful plan. Every step I took was for them, to protect their innocence while ensuring that the truth came to light. I felt a surge of both pride and sorrow. Pride in my own patience and resolve, and sorrow for the betrayal that had forced me into this position. As the day progressed, I began to notice subtle shifts in the family dynamic. Relatives who had been oblivious began to sense the tension, noticing the slight awkwardness in responses, the careful choice of words, and the fleeting hesitations. The web of secrecy that had once shielded my partner began to dissolve under the combined pressure of observation and circumstance. The exposure was quiet, almost invisible, but unmistakable in its effect. By evening, I knew the confrontation had succeeded. The truth was no longer hidden. The betrayer faced the consequences not through anger or conflict, but through the natural fallout of honesty coming to light. Their carefully crafted facade had crumbled, and they could no longer manipulate the perceptions of those around them. The weight of deception pressed down visibly, and I felt a quiet, resolute sense of empowerment settle within me. Even as the house returned to a semblance of normalcy, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The truth had been revealed without chaos, without dramatic confrontation, but with undeniable impact. The person who had hidden so much could no longer pretend, could no longer mask the choices they had made. The act of unmasking them had been deliberate, intelligent, and careful, just as it needed to be. I finally allowed myself to sit back and exhale, the tension in my shoulders slowly easing. The betrayal had been exposed, the truth had been revealed, and I had orchestrated it in a way that maintained my dignity, protected my child, and held the betrayer accountable. There was relief, yes, but also a sober understanding. This was only the beginning of the healing process, and the careful navigation of consequences had only just begun. After the subtle unmasking, I realized that confrontation alone wouldn't be enough. The person who had betrayed me needed consequences, but not in the form of dramatic outbursts or public shaming. I wanted justice that was smart, quiet, and effective, a way to reclaim control while maintaining the dignity of my child and the rest of the family. The first step was boundaries. I began to limit their access to certain aspects of family life, ensuring they could no longer manipulate or hide behind the routines we had shared. Invitations to small gatherings became intentional, monitored, and carefully structured. I allowed interactions, but on my terms. Each step was measured, each action deliberate, designed to demonstrate that deception carried consequences without creating chaos. I also began to document everything. Notes, messages, small inconsistencies. They were all recorded, not out of spite, but to maintain clarity and protect the family. Knowledge was power, and by keeping a careful record, I ensured that lies could not resurface unchecked. Even casual conversations became opportunities to reinforce accountability, and I watched as the person who had hidden so much slowly realized their influence was diminishing. Social accountability was subtle but firm. I allowed mutual relatives to witness patterns without ever accusing overtly. Through small observations, careful reminders, and quiet questions, I guided them to see for themselves what had been hidden. There was no shouting, no drama, but the results were undeniable. The betrayer found themselves increasingly isolated, their web of influence crumbling in silence. I also leveraged opportunities to demonstrate integrity publicly while exposing truth privately. In conversations, I highlighted honesty, transparency, and the importance of trust without pointing fingers. The juxtaposition was clear. While I acted with openness and consistency, the other person's deceptions became increasingly evident to those paying attention. It was a slow, almost invisible form of justice, but profoundly effective. Meanwhile, I focused on my child, ensuring that their birthday and the days after were filled with love, attention, and reassurance. I refused to let the shadow of betrayal overshadow their happiness. Every activity, every game, every quiet conversation reinforced stability and warmth. Protecting them was my priority, and it fueled the careful execution of every step I took against the deception. Small victories added up. Invitations they expected were withheld. Privileges they assumed were redefined. Requests for help or collaboration were carefully evaluated and granted only when appropriate. Each subtle action demonstrated that trust could no longer be taken for granted, and that honesty was the only currency in the household moving forward. The person who had betrayed us was learning consequences not through punishment, but through quiet, undeniable shifts in the environment. I also used communication wisely. I addressed issues calmly, clearly, and without excessive emotion. I allowed them space to respond, but the structure of interactions made it clear that manipulation and secrecy were no longer tolerated. The combination of patience, intelligence, and strategic action gradually eroded their ability to control narratives or hide facts. The sense of quiet justice was both empowering and precise. At the same time, family members began to adjust. They noticed patterns, observed changes, and began to understand the impact of deception without needing me to explain it all. Conversations became more honest, interactions more transparent, and slowly, the household began to recalibrate. Trust was not immediately restored, but it was being redefined on new, firmer foundations. I took time for myself, too. Reflection and planning became part of my routine, helping me maintain emotional clarity while orchestrating these subtle consequences. I didn't act out of anger or revenge. I acted with intelligence, strategy, and an unwavering focus on protecting the people who mattered most. It was a controlled, deliberate reclaiming of power that ensured no further damage could be done. By the end of the week, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The betrayer was no longer the center of influence. Their manipulations had lost potency, and the family began to heal in small, deliberate ways. The justice I had enacted was quiet, almost invisible, but profoundly effective. It demonstrated the power of patience, intelligence, and careful action. Even as normal routines returned, I felt a sense of relief and satisfaction. The lies had been exposed, accountability established, and my child's world safeguarded. Justice had been served not through confrontation alone, but through strategic, thoughtful action. The family began to rebuild, trust carefully reinstated, and I felt a quiet, confident strength settle over me. The betrayal had been profound, but the response had been measured, deliberate, and ultimately empowering. The days that followed the party were quiet, almost painfully so at first. The house felt different, lighter in some ways, but still carrying the echoes of the secrets that had been uncovered. I spent hours simply sitting, reflecting on everything that had happened. The whispers, the hidden notes, the careful unmasking, and the subtle consequences I had put into place. Each step had been exhausting, emotionally and mentally, but necessary. I thought about trust and how fragile it could be, how easily it could be broken, even by someone I had believed was completely loyal. And yet, I also realized how strong it could be when rebuilt with care, patience, and deliberate intention. I had witnessed firsthand the consequences of deception, but I had also seen the resilience of those willing to act with integrity. That contrast gave me perspective, helping me understand what mattered most. My child became the center of my focus. Their world was still bright, full of laughter, innocence, and hope, and I vowed to protect it at all costs. Every interaction, every small moment of guidance, was infused with that determination. I noticed subtle changes in them too, a growing sense of security, a lightness in their steps, a smile that seemed freer than it had in weeks. Their happiness became both my anchor and my motivation, reminding me why patience and careful planning had been essential. I reflected on my own strength as well. I had felt anger, heartbreak, and disbelief, yet I had managed to channel those emotions into deliberate action. I had observed, collected evidence, orchestrated subtle exposure, and enacted consequences, all while maintaining composure, protecting my child, and preserving dignity. The experience taught me the power of measured response, the strength of clarity, and the value of intelligence over rash emotion. There were moments of grief, too, unavoidable and necessary. I mourned the betrayal, the loss of innocence in my expectations, and the realization that the person I had trusted most had chosen secrecy over honesty. That grief was real, raw, and bitter, but it also served as a guide, helping me understand the boundaries I needed to set and the vigilance required to prevent similar harm in the future. Healing began in small, almost imperceptible ways. Conversations became more honest, interactions more deliberate, and a new rhythm settled over the family. Trust was cautiously reinstated where possible, and bonds that had frayed began to strengthen, albeit with care and awareness. I realized that rebuilding wasn't about forgetting or forgiving blindly. It was about redefining relationships on new, firmer foundations. I also recognized the importance of forgiveness, not as an erasure of betrayal, but as a conscious choice to release the corrosive power of anger and bitterness. Forgiveness, I learned, was for my own peace as much as for anyone else's sake. It didn't mean allowing past mistakes to continue, but it did allow me to move forward with clarity, strength, and purpose. I felt lighter, more focused, and more capable of making decisions that protected the family's well-being. Reflection brought clarity about vigilance as well. I realized that trust, while precious, required awareness and careful observation. It wasn't about suspicion or paranoia. It was about understanding that even the people closest to us can make choices that affect us deeply. That awareness didn't diminish love, it strengthened it because it allowed me to act decisively and protectively when necessary. As weeks turned into months, the family began to settle into a new normal. The betrayer, while still present, was no longer in a position to manipulate or deceive. Boundaries had been clearly defined, accountability firmly established, and the family had begun to rebuild its foundation on transparency, honesty, and care. Each day brought small victories. Laughter returned more freely. Conversations became more genuine, and the home regained a sense of warmth and stability. I also allowed myself to hope again. Not naive hope, but cautious hope rooted in experience, clarity, and control. I knew that the past could not be undone, and that some scars would remain. But I also knew that the present and future could be shaped with intention and intelligence. There was room for love, joy, and connection, carefully nurtured, carefully guarded, but still possible. Looking back, I saw the journey as one of both challenge and growth. I had confronted betrayal, navigated deception, and enacted justice, all while protecting the people I loved most. The process had been exhausting, painful, and emotionally intense, but had also been empowering. I had learned that resilience, patience, and deliberate action could overcome even the deepest breaches of trust. I ended each day quietly, often sitting with my child or alone in reflection, allowing the house to settle and my mind to process. There was a deep sense of earned strength, a knowledge that I had acted wisely, and a quiet confidence that the family could now thrive on firmer ground. The lessons of trust, vigilance, and careful judgment were no longer abstract. They were lived, tested, and proven. And so, with the past acknowledged, the present carefully managed, and the future cautiously embraced, I allowed myself a sense of peace. Healing was ongoing, but the path was clear. We were moving forward together, stronger, wiser, and more resilient. And in that quiet acceptance, I felt the first true breath of freedom after months of uncertainty, betrayal, and fear, a freedom grounded in love, awareness, and the knowledge that we could survive and even flourish after everything.